And I think that we saw a couple of announcements this week that that are sort of leaning into that.
Hmm.
The first was this was an announcement just 2 days ago from WalkMe. They introduced something called WalkMeX, and I'm probably a little skeptical, as you know. I think you talked about it last week. They were just acquired by SAP, and
Yeah.
that to me is always a danger sign when when these large companies acquires a smaller innovative company. And so we'll see where that plays out. They're obviously working on this before the acquisition, but this is meant to be a universal co-pilot that, using the WalkMe technology, sort of creates this contextual awareness of what they're claiming, contextual awareness across any workload, any app. I think that's a very difficult thing to do, so I'm not sure that they're going to live up to that. But the most important part of this was that it's proactive, or it has this proactive element where it's monitoring this, and then instead of waiting for you to prompt, go into a copilot and ask it a question, you proactively says, hey, here's a situation, here's an issue that maybe you should be looking at, right? And so that sort of proactive piece of this. The other announcement came out of Asana, that was a week before, and they're announcing this thing that they're calling AI teammates. So they're expressly not
Hmm.
positioning them as fully autonomous agents or as a co-pilot, but this thing that sort of sits in the middle that can also act proactively, like someone who's on your team might do. It's like, oh, hey, we got this thing, you should take a look at this, and this interaction. And this goes back to the conversation we had a couple weeks ago about the fact that as humans, we don't really want something, or we may not want something operating fully autonomously outside of our purview. We want to have some degree of control, but we also want higher levels of automation. And I think that's where some of the co-pilot approaches may struggle, because if it's always there and it always requires me to drive the conversation, I may miss something because I don't know to ask for it. And so these are a couple of moves towards this idea of driving both contextual awareness and in a proactive type approach to sort of bridge that gap. And I think
Hmm.
we're going to see more of this. And I think it's smart. I think you have to be able to deliver. So I think WalkMe also had some of the hyperbole challenges. You have to be able to deliver, but I think it's the approach that is going to be prevalent as we go forward.
Yeah. What I like about the WalkMeX announcement is that WalkMe provides this step-by-step guide of how to use an application. So I see that documentation uh, and conversation aspect of WalkMeX as an extension. It actually is organic to where they would probably go even if LLMs didn't exist. Except it would have been so much harder. So I feel like there's at least an organic extension that exists there that doesn't always exist with a lot of companies that are just AI washing their solutions and adding an LLM and leaving users to try to figure out what to do next. Here, there's this direction from providing guidance on how to use the application and then moving from that to a deeper documentation and conversation there. I have to admit, I'm a little more worried about the Asana teammate, at least positioning. I honestly feel that a lot of these LLM agents and capabilities are best described as something like contextualizers or providing some sort of framework that is in line with the business. But of course, that's not very fun to say. So we have to find things like teammates and partners and buddies and co-pilots and what have you to try to personalize it a little bit and anthropomorphize it to help
Yeah,
help you buy it.
I do think I think we're going to see this battle play out of striking the right balance. All right. At the end of the day, all of these are approaches that are related to the agentic AI
Mhm.
motion, about having much more autonomy in the actions, and that it's not just this purely reactive sort of thing. And I think that there's no question that that's going to be where this lands. But I think there's going to be this continual fight in nomenclature, terminology, how we position it, to figure out what people will accept. And the idea here is sort of similar to having like a chat bot that is embedded into Teams or Slack, right? Where it's sitting there and you can send it something, and it acts on it and then brings it back to you, much like you would a person, right? I send something to you, say, hey, can you look at this and get back to me, and then a day later you send it back to me. Well, that's the idea that they're trying to convey, that it's not just this chat that's sitting there that can actually perform actions for you, but not where it's just like Skynet running off doing its own thing where you have no control. And that's what they're trying to convey. And I think it's smart insofar as I think that's ultimately the model that most of us want.
Yep.
But it's how we message that, how we position that, and then how we execute on it. Right. I mean, going back to the WalkMe thing, I think their limit is, they're fundamentally driven by a website injection, right? That's how they're really contextualizing, and that gives, there's a limit to that. And so, can they execute? Can they deliver on their promise? I think that's going to be the question. I also think what WalkMe's, and to a certain degree Asana's as well, announcement also speak to, in addition to this proactive and contextualization, it's also this idea of a pervasive connection, right? So, we've talked in the past about Microsoft having 130 co-pilots and all of this, and I think that we're going to have this saturation point where I don't want to have to deal with how many different AI agents do I have floating around all over the place. I already personally use 4 every day, and it's already sort of too much. And
Mhm.
and so I think WalkMe is on the right track of saying, hey, this is the AI agent to rule them all, that kind of sits over it again if they can deliver on it. So I think we're going to see that movement play out as well. But it just, going all the way back to what we were talking about, I think as an enterprise leader, you just have this stuff is changing so flippin'
Mm.
fast, and trying to figure out where to place your bets. Really, the root of it always has to be starting with what are the things that are going to move your organization forward, and where can you leverage any of these technologies to help you do that? And that's where you have to focus, because otherwise you just get swept up in all of it.
Yeah, and I think this is a rubber meets the road moment for a bunch of these future of work vendors. I would include Asana in that, but also probably Slack, ServiceNow. Some of these companies that have been talking the talk for the past 5 years ago or so about how they are going to transform the workplace. They got a starting point during COVID when we had the great experiment of trying to figure out how to work remotely. But with the combination of hybrid work and now LLMs, I think this is a real turning point to figure out who really was thinking about the future of work and how to fundamentally do things differently, because now we have a bunch of tools to do things differently, and this is the time to actually reimagine and create a better workplace, or show that you were just creating a bunch of interesting flashy features the past few years.
No doubt. I think it's a good way of saying it. I think the next 12 to 24 months, if you're an enterprise IT leader, it is going to be about how do you make this practical. And simply, as much as I'm broadly bullish on what Microsoft is doing, simply deploying a Teams Copilot isn't going to cut it, right?
Yep.
It is not going to be enough to really demonstrate that you're leveraging this technology in novel ways to create competitive advantage for the organization, and that's ultimately going to be the only thing that really matters in some way. And so I think that it is that we're rapidly reaching, we'll call it the first rubber meets the road kind of period. I think, as we talked about, it's going to continue changing and evolving, but we've been at this now for what, a year and a half, and it's time that organizations have to start being, demonstrating some practical value out of it.
Right, because if Accenture is talking about the $4 trillion of GDP that's going to be created from AI, honestly, we are not there right now. To get from here to there, some sort of fundamental change has to happen. And honestly, I think that even without reaching 4 trillion or even 1 trillion, like we are changing the way work is happening, but the actual value needs to start showing up in actual profits and revenues and bottom line.